We have 120 leaders, senior leaders from business, from government and public service here. It's a T20, G20 event. Insights that are shared today will be captured, recorded and translated for the G20 plenary summit in November, Johannesburg.
Please help me welcome the CEO of National Empowerment Fund, Mr. Mzi Daimani.
Thank you so much for that, and good evening to everyone. Good evening. My name is Mzi Daimani. But before I do the introduction, I would like to invite my panel. I'm going to invite, firstly, Ms. Khomotso Selukane. If you can please give a round of applause. Khomotso is the CEO of Heron Marine. She is a specialist in the marine and the transport sector. And she is also the chairperson of the Petroleum and Liquid Fuels Charter. And she has a vast experience within the transport and the bunkering sector. So she's going to be sharing her expertise with us today. And then I'm going to invite Nokuthula Fakude, who is the manager of ESD and the third-party funds at the National Empowerment Fund. Can we please give a round of applause? And lastly, Mr. Andy Lestemela. He is an executive at the National Empowerment Fund. Is responsible for significant investments as well as strategy. So I was listening to the introduction there, it made me to think. So I grew up on a farm in the Eastern Cape, and I went to study law at the University of Stellenbosch. And at that time, my father was actually a worker in the farm, and my mother was also a domestic worker. So I got the opportunity to go to university, and then I ended up in Johannesburg. I did articles at a firm called Cliff Decker in Sandton, which opened opportunities for me. So someone identified the talent in me and gave me the opportunity. So I managed to do the articles, and I think there is a profound point that was made that people want jobs, but they don't want to work. But what I did experience is that if you do work hard, the opportunities do open up. Now, the question is, how do we actually ensure that opportunities are opened up for the next generations? Because currently in the country, I think what is true is that if we do not create the opportunities, if we do not deal with the youth unemployment issue, we are all not safe. It is not a matter of race. It is not a matter of your standing in society. No matter how secure you are in the estate that you stay in, they're going to come for you. I think one of the things that we all know, when you are hungry, you become desperate. And it is our responsibility to ensure that we create the jobs and we actually create the opportunities for everyone. So I am very privileged to stand here because there is, this place is anointed. There was a preacher who was standing here earlier on, and I could feel the spirit as I was sitting there. I'm sure you felt it too. I hear a few amens here. So before my panel starts, I'm going to ask the gentleman on the panel, Mr. Andy Lestemela. He's got a couple of slides that he's going to be sharing with us. He's going to give an overview of what we do as the National Empowerment Fund and what we do in particular around transformation and job creation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Daimani, and good evening to all the attendants. My name is Andile Stemela. I am the Divisional Executive in charge of Strategy and Planning at the NEF. I think what I try to do today, instead of going into what the NEF necessarily does, but to start to talk about the challenge that we are looking at as we try to fund businesses. For those who are not initiated, I suppose, the NEF was created to fund businesses that are significantly or majority black owned. That does not mean we don't fund businesses that are in partnership where, true genuine partners are working with one another to solve problems. Sorry, just looking at that. As was mentioned earlier, the stats came out around, the quarterly labor force stats came out. And, whenever these come out, I think we all grin and cross our fingers to hear good news, and very rarely it happens. But, we still have to deal with it. I think the very real reality that we're facing in South Africa is that whilst a lot of progress has happened since the advent of the democratic South Africa, it's a dual economy that runs almost side by side. So I pulled from those stats, in terms of, the unemployment rates that we're looking at. And if you compare, South Africa and its developed contemporaries like the EU, the US, and the UK, there's a group of people who have unemployment levels that are akin to the first world, whilst there is a very big majority, concerningly enough, that have unemployment, are facing the unemployment challenge more starkly, at around 30% plus, with black Africans sitting around 37%, colored South Africans at 24%, and with white South Africans at around 7% in those single digits. Interestingly enough, of those that are employed, around 56% are men and 44% are women, which is another big area of concern facing South Africans. When going into youth, I think this problem only is only inflamed further. Without going into the full detail of the data, I think effectively since 2015, quarter one, 10 years later, youth unemployment has grown from around 37% to the current levels of around 45%. Where youth are mostly employed is in the finance and property sectors, community and social services, and the trade sectors, which encompasses retail, wholesale, hotels, restaurants, and so on. Traditional sectors like marketing that are known to be job catalyzers don't in themselves create jobs directly, but they do have that multiplier effect, and that's why they continue to be an area of focus for a lot of government programs. By occupation levels, I think the biggest employment of youth happens in the semi-skilled and unskilled sectors of the different occupations, and it drops. Yes, one more slide, I'll be done. And it drops as the higher you go and more skilled and technical people are. So we've been working now with government to say we need a program that impacts unemployment and employment significantly through an aggregated approach where both private sector and public sector come together to solve a lot of these issues, around employment in the townships, having proper financial products that help entrepreneurs, young and old, of course, but specifically young entrepreneurs to access the formal economy. To that, maybe just to jump to the last slide, I think what's important or what's interesting for us is business is a risk-based decision, and not every business succeeds because it was started. But where we do try to see some kind of trends of success is how many of these businesses last or live beyond the 5-year mark. And we see that sectors like finance and property, wholesale, mining and manufacturing, much like in the earlier slides, those tend to be the highest job absorbers. And the idea with the Transformation Fund is that with this aggregated pool, if you are able to fund it around 150,000 Rand per job, you can make an impact of creating no fewer than 700,000 jobs in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that. So, one of the ways that the NEF has created jobs is through what we call training programs. I'll make one example. About 2 years ago, we started a program where we took about 100 unemployed youth, and we actually worked with them. They ran some of the programs that the NEF was working on for the government, the transformation initiatives, and we placed some of them in the businesses that we funded, and we paid them out of our own coffers. Now, we've been tracking the progress of those young people over the last few years, and as soon as some of them got a year's experience, about 95% of them actually managed to get permanent employment. So what this is telling us is that if you open the opportunities for young people, there is always the requirement, I think it was mentioned earlier, that you need a certain level of experience before you get employed. And that's an area that we actually have identified that we need to actively play in to ensure that we open those opportunities for young people. Now, Andile touched on the concept of a transformation fund. There's been a lot of information that has been in the public domain about it. So we've actually come up with this concept, and we engaged government to say, if the country could actually work, private sector and the public sector, in order to ensure that their resources are managed collectively, and also we work with the private sector in order to open the opportunities, including the opportunities for entrepreneurship and employment. And we actually provide the financial support that is required jointly with the private sector. And we also ensure that as government, we contribute significant resources that will ensure that we achieve those objectives. We believe that the government can actually go a long way in order to dent the unemployment crisis that we are facing as a country. Now, having given that background, I'm going to come to Khomotso. So, Khomotso, you are involved in the transport sector. So, I want you to just maybe tell us how you believe you can actually use that sector, the transport and the maritime sector. How can we create opportunities within that space? How can we actually ensure that the youth in the country have got the opportunities? And how can that particular sector contribute towards the Transformation Fund?
Thank you, Mr. Dahman. There was a lady earlier on that spoke towards what the transport sector and the ability that it has its reach. So when you look at, I guess, the various aspects or facets within the integrated transport sector, they have their own abilities to increase, I guess, the viability of youth employment in this country. So I'll give you an example. I started an entity 8 years ago called Heron Marine, and what we do is offshore bunkering. So offshore bunkering is basically a petrol station in the ocean. There's nothing very clever about it, with vessels that were going up and down the breadth of this country. We looked at various stations around the world and the global trades that allow for such flows when you look at, I guess, shipments or movements of ships. An entity or a country like Togo, where the majority of the West African bunkering happens outside of I guess, in Lome. They then created a bunkering station there, and the offshoot of that was that 45,000 jobs were created just from that ability. So what is that? It was basically like creating a Montrose in the middle of the ocean. So instead of creating or moving with more fuel to get to the next destination, you were using less fuel with the security of suppliers who got there and more cargo. Now, the statistics around maritime state that for every one offshore job, you have the ability to create 5 onshore jobs. That in itself is an effective way of creating jobs for youth. We looked at that creation in the Nuga when that was up and running, and that worked very well for us. In the other aspects of transport, so as a sector council, we are now gazetting the new codes that are coming out on all 8 sectors of council, or all 8 sectors of transport. So you're looking at aviation, maritime, rail, public sector, bus, taxi, and so on. With the new rail reform that we're looking at creating manufacturing and integration of that, so youth can come in there. We are also then looking at aviation, which is quite an interesting aspect of it. We had a conversation this week with our aviation counterparts, and just certain, I guess, skills and aligning them with international skills, you have the ability to then either export your skills development or your skills of the youth, or create more jobs for them within our current sector. Global trade and I guess geopolitical issues created the ability for us to understand that South Africa doesn't necessarily have a lack of skills. So we have a very skilled youth. It's just the ability for them to move out of the conventional jobs, as Mrs. Dimela mentioned earlier on. When you start opening up these avenues towards skills, you then have the ability, or different sectors, and you allow for them to see that outside of what they've been doing predominantly, there is the ability for them to walk into it. When we had, I guess, the initial Ukraine-Russia geopolitical issue, we found that there was a need for diesel mechanics, which was something that was quite prevalent within our South African, I guess, bound borders, because you found them from FET colleges. So creating the skills base and finding that directory will then allow for us to then put them into the, I guess, the different sectors that are there.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Fakude, can I come to you?
Yes, sir.
Can you please tell us what opportunities have you identified to cultivate partnerships for young graduates? And how do we actually bring into that the young people within the rural areas?
All right, thanks, Mr. Taimani. Having been active in the space for a while, I have realized that we are not intentional as a country, both from the private and the public sector. We like structure, we don't want to take risks. So my belief is that as corporate South Africa and the public sector, as we offer these opportunities to the service providers under ESD, as well as supply development, we need to be very intentional in saying to those people that are given these opportunities, as we give you this opportunity, take along 3 people, 3 young people, and walk the journey with them. Because someone has to believe in these people. You go out there, you apply for a job, all you get told is that you need experience. You can't buy experience. Someone has to believe in you. Someone has to create a business opportunity for jobs to be created. So without us being intentional and opening doors for these young people, that most are from rural areas, some of them are graduates sitting at home. It's very embarrassing for our country to hear that there are doctors who are sitting at home. So we need to be intentional in opening these doors by saying, we are giving you this contract, but there is this clause that says you must take someone with you. 2 or 3 with clear performance indicators and milestones, so that after a year or 2, we know that these 3 young people, 4 young people, 1 person has been empowered to either be employed or to run their own business. I believe that it can be done. We just need to all play our part and put on all hands on deck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noguthula. Mr. Stimela, let me get back to you. Earlier on, there's a gentleman, Mr. Towel, I think he's from Avro Shane. He actually challenged us to say they actually have hundreds, if not thousands, of young people that are actually working in their business. I think they sell cosmetics, but he actually mentioned the struggles that they face in terms of access to technology, in terms of access to business skills, like bookkeeping, as well as ensuring that they manage their finances, just to make sure that they run their businesses well. Now, can you please tell us how can the NEF get involved there to ensure that we work with corporates in order to maximize on opportunities like that, that will actually increase the numbers in terms of employment and ensuring that we are actually growing the economy of the country?
Thanks for that, Mr. Taimani. So, one thing that we've seen, and I think it was mentioned by Noguthula, that if there isn't intentionality in the work that we do, then things actually go by the by the side, because people are target driven. You put the target in front of them, they try to overcome it. Most times they do because they know that it's there to be overcome. But if you assume it for them, then you'll see the behavior also treated as passive as that. So what we've tried to do through our investment approach is to say, for every approval that we have, this target of 12 months uninterrupted work experience is key and critical for all businesses that we fund. Therefore, over and above your initial call it staff complement, say for example, you have a manufacturing concern, you have 50 permanent employees. Our target will then be to say, as part of our non-financial covenants with you, having lent you the funding that we have, we want you to employ 5 graduates or 5 semi-skilled young people that would be part-funded in partnership with the likes of your sector education training associations, your SETAs. And what that does effectively is that it ensures that there will always be a cycle. After the 12 months, whether the 5 are actually absorbed into that business or move on to get other employment, that high rate of absorption after the 12 months of work is undeniable. It does work, and this is how private sector, whether funded by DFI or not, can really be intentional about giving those opportunities to young people.
Okay, thank you. Khomuso, final one for you. Do you believe that the South Africa's foreign missions are adequately resourced and mandated to help to implement a youth skills export and repatriation strategy? And how do you think we can learn from other countries who do that as South Africa?
Thank you. Wow. The idea is that we would then need to start exporting our youth, right? So that's the first thing that we would need to look at, is the collaborative approach with external sort of missions. So if you look at what we're currently doing, the T20 in alignment with the G20, we're aligning ourselves with the Africa Free Trade Agreements, as well as bilaterals that we've signed with various countries. It's then looking at how we can then align ourselves or leverage off those bilaterals to then say, how do we then take our youth there for them to learn over a time period so that we do not allow for ourselves to have a brain drain within the sovereign and then repatriate them back. I believe those abilities are there. What does it do? It, one, solves the ability for unemployment outside of us having to try and deal with the current infrastructure issues. So we need to be honest about ourselves as a country. We lack certain infrastructure and we need to fix it, but in the meantime, we still need to fix the unemployment issue. So how do we then collaborate in the spaces as we are, speaking to the likes of G20 and our Africa Free Trade Agreements, to then leverage off those things in terms of taking youth there to then learn and then bring them back. And I guess the likes of the NEF or other government institutions or private sector then saying, giving them, I guess, incentive to come back. So if you do come back, you then say to them, we will give you seed capital to start business based off what you've learned in Germany or wherever it is that we took you to in terms of that joint skills programs. So we've seen it with the likes of TITA taking quite a few of our South African students to the World Maritime University for them to understand and learn maritime and then bring them back, as well as other aviation skills. So it does happen. It's just about being intentional, as Ms. Faguta said.
Okay, so maybe let me make one example. Some years ago, as we're about to go down, we funded, as the NEF, a business in Limpopo. We gave that business about 45 million rand in order to, it was a fresh produce market. Now, over the years, we have funded certain entrepreneurs that have been running that business. But we identified opportunities there. So we are currently taking almost 50 SMMEs that are actually in the fresh produce market. And what we're doing is we're providing a facility for each one of them, starting from around 125,000 rand. And those are trained, and each one of them, we're hoping that it will employ at least 10 people that will supply to this initiative. Andile talked about the issue of aggregation, because in order for us to make sure that we get the numbers when it comes to employment, we have to create niche markets like that. So the issue is, which industries within the country, which is the call that we're making to corporates, to say we can work with a corporate where we can provide assistance to the business that will become an anchor in order to create job creation from an entrepreneurship point of view, and also within its business as well. Because we also took young graduates that we actually placed within that business, and we, as Andile mentioned, we actually have access to the money that is sitting within the SITAs, because the country has got a lot of resources. Unfortunately, they're not used appropriately or adequately. And there is an opportunity that if we can actually get our energies together with the intention of creating jobs in the country, we can actually create those opportunities. And I think the advantage that we have is the influence that we have to make sure that we can actually engage government and also working with the corporates. And what we are saying is that we need to ensure that we set apart the work that we're doing when it comes to issues of governance and ensuring that we are accountable in terms of the resources that we have. So the plea or the call that we're making to everyone in the room is that we are actually have a vision to ensure that we create jobs across the country, and we need to have partners that will work with us. We can actually ensure that we bring resources to the table, and we're looking for partners that will actually also bring resources, or that will bring the necessary markets and the opportunities to ensure that we create the jobs. Our time is up. Thank you very much. Let's give the panel a round of applause.